Hey everybody, I'm Elizabeth McSwan from eMac and Hedwig, and today's video is another Post-Processing Friday video where I take an image that I created and I show you step by step how I edit it. So, here we go. So this is the shot I'm going to be post-processing for you today. This is of a pigeon Guillemot that I photographed in Washington State when I was on a month-and-a-half long trip across the US, and I'm in the process of making a video about that trip and sharing stories and images. And so if you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link to the video in the description below. If it's not there, it just means the video isn't finished yet and it's not up on YouTube yet. In the meantime, I'm going to post-process this shot for you guys and just show you how I do it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crop and I'm going to straighten this image. So I'm going to go into the crop tool here and I'm going to change the aspect ratio to a 4:3 aspect ratio, which just makes it a little boxier. If you guys saw my video on the piping plover image that I post-processed, I talked about this a little bit. I talked about changing the aspect ratio, and I'll link that in the description below as well if you want to check it out. I like this aspect ratio a little bit better for portraiture, wildlife portraiture, or people portraiture for that matter. I just think that it's a better composition and kind of framing. I just like it a little bit better most of the time. Of course, there are always exceptions. And so while I'm in the crop tool here, I'm also going to straighten this image. As you can see, the ground slopes pretty significantly down to the right here. And while that might be a natural slope, to me, it just doesn't look natural, and I would rather have it be level. And if you're somebody that doesn't like to do a lot of post-processing on your images, I would really encourage you to incorporate leveling your shots or straightening your shots, especially if there is an indicator of horizon, whether it's the actual horizon or something like this, the ground sloping, and just to make sure that your image is really straightened. Because even if it just needs a little bit, like here, we're just going to straighten it a little bit. And I basically am just aligning where the surf, this is the ocean behind the bird here, where the surf meets the sand, and I'm just aligning it to that sort of last bottom grid line. So that looks a little bit better. It looks like it's not leaning so much on its left foot, and it just has better balance to me, kind of leveling out that ground. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to work on the exposure here a little bit. So overall, I think that the exposure can be brought up a little bit. So I'm just gonna move that up a little bit. And as you can see, my histogram changes, right? So if this is where we started here, this is where we started with the histogram, and then watch it as I bring it up, it changes like that. I don't want to pull up all of the blacks by pulling up the exposure further than this. What I'm really interested in is just pulling up the brighter parts of this image, the background here. So I'm going to go to the highlights, and I'm just going to pull those up a little bit more. And what you can do in Lightroom is you can, on my Mac, I can hold down the Alt-Option key. And I'm going to do that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the whites here, and it's going to show me when and where the areas get blown out. So as you can see, it's the area behind the bird. And because it's the background and it's already so blurred out, I don't really mind losing a lot of detail there as long as it's kind of nice and bright. So that looks pretty good. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the exposure on the bird a little bit. So I'm going to grab my selection tool here, and I have it checked so that you and I can see where I'm selecting. And you'll notice that the edges of my brush are really feathered, really soft edges. And as you can see here, the feathering is way up to 100 here. And basically what this does is it allows for a more sort of gentle selection, edge of the selection. And I just find that to be a little bit better. Just generally speaking, I like to have a very soft edge, even if it means having to go back later and just make sure and just clean up the edges basically. I just think that having a soft edge gives a more natural feel, and so when you're making these changes, it's not so dramatic, and it's a little bit more gradual along the edges and looks a little bit more natural. So what I'm going to do is, I don't want to bring up the exposure on this, I just want to bring up the shadows. So I'm just going to bring up the shadows a bit, and I'm just on the head because that to me is the most important part of the bird. It's what I want to highlight and feature. It's where I want my viewer's eye to go, to the head. And then I'm also going to make a selection on the eye here. Like this. And sometimes what I like to do is bring it up way up, and see what happens, and then go back down to something a little bit more reasonable. It's not quite so bad. So, and then I'm going to, so that looks pretty good. I just want to see, what if I bring down the blacks just a little bit? Something like that. And I'm also just going to add on the eye, I'm just going to add a little bit of sharpening. Just a bit here. Oop. Something like that. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is, there's a little bit of debris here. And I don't think it's on the bird. I think it's actually in front of the bird, like in the air. And I'm just going to remove that here. So this is the Clone Heal tool. I never used to use this tool in Lightroom because it was just not that good. But in recent updates of Lightroom, it's actually gotten to be quite good. So there are certain circumstances where if you have things like this that you want to remove, you can. So that looks a little bit better there, yeah. So the next thing is I want to add a little bit of contrast across the image, just a little bit. It's going to darken my subject a little bit, but I just kind of want to punch that up. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add saturation. But if I add saturation to the whole image, it adds color to the bird on the bird's head and shoulder here that I don't want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my brush tool, and I'm basically going to paint almost the entire image. And then erase a bunch of it. The selection tool, this selection brush, is really the one tool that I use the most. It's really, in my opinion, the best tool at your disposal in Lightroom, or whatever other post-processing software you use that has this tool. Because oftentimes there are adjustments you need to make, but you need to make them on specific parts of the image. So it just gives you a lot more control over what you can do to an image, which is really, really advantageous. So I'm going to turn this off now that we've got that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pump up the saturation a little bit. And what that does is it just gives a little bit more color in the water here, and also in the legs. The legs now are really red, but I kind of like it. I kind of dig it. And it's such a monochromatic image that having these really, really red legs to me is really kind of awesome. So I'll leave that there like that. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create this last selection like this. And I'm going to just raise the exposure just a smidgen there. And what happens when I give that a little contrast too? And a lot of times it's really just trial and error. It's really just seeing what happens when you move the sliders around and what you can do. And that's really how you develop your eye to being able to see what you can do with your image once you get it into post-processing. So that looks pretty good. Now, if I wanted to go back to any of these selections, all I have to do is click the brush tool here, and all of these circles, all of these circles here indicate a selection, right? So if I wanted to go back to this selection, I would just click on it, and then I could make more adjustments if I thought that the saturation was too much or not enough, or I wanted to add something else to this selection. I could do that. And then just click done here. And that's the image, everybody. Let's see what it looks like when compared to what we started with here after the crop, because it doesn't include the crop. And again, these changes are pretty subtle. You know, it's mostly in exposure, a little contrast, a little change in saturation. I really like these subtle changes. I think that they make a big difference, even though it isn't a lot of change. So there we have it. Final image. Boom. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you have a particular post-processing technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will find a photograph that I can demonstrate that technique for you. As always, if you are so inclined, please like this video, please subscribe to my channel. It would help me out a lot. I'd really appreciate it. Also, you can find me on Patreon. The link is in the description below. For as little as $2 a month, you can get early access to videos like this, along with a bunch of other really cool stuff. You can also find me on Instagram at emac_photo. I share a lot of photographs on Instagram. It's the best way to see my work. Until the next video, everyone, take care, happy adventuring, happy shooting. See you later.